Howdy gamers! After hitting silver for the first time, I wanted to make a video about the process that got me there. One of my goals with this video is to help other players, and while I could just do a bunch of tips, every player is different, so I think that describing a process for improvement would be more helpful. That way, I might be able to help people that play with a different style than I do, or that have a different skill set than me. I think the two most crucial parts of my process are my mentality towards improving and the routine that I use. So, starting with mentality, let's get into the details. When trying to improve, I try to play with a growth mentality. At a high level, this really just means that instead of prioritizing high placement and LP gains, I try to focus on improving. If I was just trying to place high, I would avoid a lot of risk taking and be much more likely to rat out a game. On the flip side, there's a few things I do when playing to improve, but not when I'm just trying to win. The first is going into games with learning objectives. Simply put, a learning objective is a specific part of the game to really focus on learning while playing out a game. Choosing a specific thing to focus on has helped me a lot, since even some of the simpler parts of the game can be a bit tricky. As an example, my most common learning objective was basically just make items fast. While this seems simple at first, there are many things that can go wrong. Stuff like not finding an item, being pushed out of a zone by someone who's more built, or even zones getting closed before you arrive. All of these things were, and frankly sometimes still are, a bit overwhelming for me. To keep things manageable, I've limited myself to having at most 2 learning objectives, preferably with one being very simple. As an example, the most common pair of objectives I used was make items fast and press the Alt key when I see people. Pressing Alt shows you a person's weapon grade and mastery level. This makes it really useful for seeing if someone's weapon is done in the early parts of the game. Some other learning objectives I've used and also recommend are pressing Tab to look at someone's equipment, looking at the mini-map when nothing else is going on, making transition items like Frag-a-rack, and using a specific ability better. In my case, this was hitting people into walls with Kathy's E. I had noticed that I was basically never wall stunning people with it, so I set it as a learning objective for a few games. If you're not sure about what to pick for yourself, I highly recommend the make items fast and press Alt key pair. It's my opinion that you basically don't get to play the game if you're too far behind on items, so making so fast is pretty useful. A benefit to focusing on one aspect of gameplay is that it's easier to get a bit creative with it, and this brings me to the second thing I do when playing to improve: trying stuff out and experimenting. The way I see it, if I never try anything new, I'll never grow as a player. This is because I believe you can't get better at Eternal Return just by grinding out games. Unlike idle games where grinding permanently increases your power, your character's strength gets reset between matches. This means that players who are more efficient at getting stronger and piloting their characters will be better off. However, efficiency isn't a matter of putting in reps. Becoming more efficient is directly related to making better decisions, both in looting and skill usage. This begs the question, how do I know which decisions are better than others? With the amount of randomness in the game, it can be hard to tell if a decision was good or bad. This brings me to the third and final part of my mentality, which is focusing on the details of a game rather than its outcome. I think deciding a decision is good or bad based just on placing high or low can make you a worse player. High placement can mean that you played well, and low placement can mean that you played poorly, but that isn't always the case. Eternal Return has its share of RNG elements, and this, coupled with the Fog of War, means you can almost never make a fully informed decision. Making the best decision with your limited amount of information can result in failure. On the flip side, you can make a bad decision and have it work out because you high rolled or someone else's decision was worse. I've had many games where I placed well but did basically nothing. I've also had games where I didn't play well but came across someone that was really underbuilt and got a free kill. There have also been times when people fought me and then died for it when I had no intention of fighting them. If I had been a better player, I might have realized I could kill them, but these are really just cases of people making a worse decision than me. Now, to put these things into context, let's have a bit of story time with one of my more interesting games. This is the first game that I lost when I originally qualified for promotion to silver. My learning objectives for this game were making Frag-a-rack, a transition item for Kathy, and looking at the minimap when stuff isn't going on. The first two zones were fairly standard, but things took a turn for the worse in my third zone. I ended up getting sandwiched by a Luke and Rosian factory, and while I did manage to escape, it set me really far behind. Later in the game, I got lucky and found meteorite from wolves. At this point, I thought, if I could just get a Tree of Life, maybe I could make Fraggerack and get back into the game. So I headed for the Cemetery Tree of Life, but there were a lot of scary people there, so I didn't end up getting it. The Forest Tree of Life didn't seem like an option either, since it was in a restricted area and probably already gone. However, to my surprise, the Hotel Tree of Life was actually still there. Hotel also has daggers, which was the other thing I needed to make a Fraggerack. Shortly after realizing this, the night to day transition happened, so I could see that there was no one in Hotel. The only person nearby was a Fiora in school, so it seemed like the plan could work. I remember thinking that the safer decision would have been to try ratting out for placement, and if I had, I might have hit silver that game. But my learning objective was making Fraggerack, so I went for it. I made my way to the hospital teleporter, but then ran into a Yuki that tried to kill me. While I did eventually get away and teleport to Hotel, I'd soon realize I was too slow. Instead of having the zone to myself, I had two other people there with me, and they probably knew where I was. Getting delayed by the Yuki had cost me my opportunity at an uncontested Tree of Life. At that point, I figured I was probably dead no matter what I did, so I went for the Tree of Life anyways. While I was collecting it, I got attacked by another Cathy who was about 4 levels up on me, only to escape into the Fiora, who then finished me off. What I thought could be a good decision to get me back into the game had utterly failed. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't frustrating, and if I'd left it at, that decision was bad because I died for it and didn't get silver, that game could have been a waste. However, as part of my process, I figured out a decision that could have gotten me the Tree of Life. This brings me to the second half of the video, which is my routine. When I'm trying to improve, I use a specific routine, kind of like someone might do for a workout or exercise. My routine is important to me for a few reasons. The first is that it lets me play at my skill level more consistently. Playing at my skill level is important so that I can focus on improving rather than fixing old issues. I've found that if I'm tired, distracted, tilted, or unfocused, I end up fixing old issues rather than learning. The other thing it lets me do is learn more efficiently, which is important since I work full-time. My routine has 3 parts. The first is getting focused. For me, this means getting a bit of exercise. Since I work with computers, I end up sitting most of the day, so any amount of exercise really helps. Currently, I go for a walk that's somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes, though any ritual that gets you focused and ready to play could be used here. The second part is a bot warm-up game, and I do the bot game just to get me thinking about my route and going through the motions. Typically, I don't even interact with the bots unless they start griefing me. I recommend against playing actual games for a couple of reasons. You can't control how long they last, they're much more exhausting, and it can be pretty tilting if you get killed early. The third part is playing and reviewing 3 games. I recommend against playing much more than 3 games at a time, since it gets harder to focus the more games you play, though you can take a break and do another block of 3 later. Going into each game, I set my 1 or 2 learning objectives for myself and then play out the game, though the most crucial part is what comes afterwards, and what I'm talking about is VOD reviews. Reviewing games has been immensely helpful to me for a few reasons. It helps distract me from tilt if I've had a bad game, since it gives me something else to do and focus on. It also gives me some time to rest between games. The review serves as a nice break, since reviewing is much less demanding than playing. And finally, reviews let me get into the details of why decisions did or didn't work, and figure out what other decisions I could have made. This last point brings me back to the game I was discussing before, and why I think a better decision could have gotten me the Tree of Life. One of the things that I keep coming back to in my reviews is using timer as a resource. By the end of that game, I was still sitting on the full 30 seconds of timer. I think that if I had gone to the chapel teleporter, which was in a restricted zone, to then get to Hotel, I probably could have gotten the Tree of Life. There's always a chance the Fiora would have come to stop me, but my odds of getting it would have been way better since I wouldn't have to deal with the Yuki. This is something that I don't think I would have figured out if I hadn't done my review. Now, before I end the video, I'd like to add that most of my VOD reviews are less interesting. For most of my climb to silver, I was just trying to figure out how to path more efficiently between boxes, or trying to figure out how I could skip items when I had trouble finding them. I feel the need to say this so that you don't have unrealistic expectations of how interesting reviews are. If you want to see my process in action, you can check out the playlist in the description below. It has VODs of every 3-game block I've played since I got serious about getting better at Eternal Return. Though for some of the earlier VODs especially, the audio quality isn't always the best. So with that, my video is basically done, but before I end it, I'd like to thank the people who inspired me to do this improvement experiment, and the friend that helped me with the script. First, I'd like to thank Coach Curtis and Nathan Mott for the Broken by Concept podcast. The process I'm using is taken directly from their advice, and while it's technically a League of Legends podcast, most of their advice about improvement isn't specific to League, which is why I can apply it to Eternal Return. Even if you're not that interested in League, I highly recommend you give it a chance. They discuss much more about improvement than I did here, and in much more detail. And quite frankly, some of their listeners have gotten pretty insane results. The most impressive I can remember is a 30-year-old guy with a wife and kids who, at the time, had reached either High Masters or Grandmasters in League on the NA ladder, so check them out. I'd also like to thank Skaz. He is easily one of the best parts of the Eternal Return community, and in a way, he's the spark that got me to start taking the game more seriously. If you're remotely new to the game, I highly recommend you check out his YouTube channel. He has a lot of videos targeted at new players, and some of them explain stuff about the game that isn't obvious. I'd also like to thank Sleepy G. He's a longtime friend of mine, and helped me a bit with the script for this video. You can thank him for the video sounding less like a lecture than it originally did. And now, I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for watching all the way through. If this video helped you in any way, please let me know. Good luck on Lumia Island, and I hope to see you again.